Thanks for sticking around, guys. I don't know if we are the bottom of the barrel or if we're batting cleanup, but we're going to give it our best shot. Thanks for coming, guys. I want to start this off just by giving you three a chance to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your backgrounds and what you do now. Randy, would you like to start?
Sure. My name's Randy Mullett. I've got a little company called Mullett Strategist that does consulting work in the transportation field. Everybody from Fortune 20 companies to high-tech startups. The business is located around Washington. I spent a lot of years there as part of the senior executive team for Conway. And now I do this consulting work, and I'm also on the board and an investor in Trucker Tools, who is one of the folks here exhibiting.
Mario?
Hi, my name is Mario Pawlowski. I'm CEO and founder of iTracker.com. iTracker.com, it's basically startup, which is, we have an ELD product, and we also helping old-style trucking industry adapt to a new digital trucking world. We're based in Chicagoland area, and I think that's all for now.
Fantastic.
Matt?
I'm Matt McLelland. I'm the innovation strategist at Covenant Transport. We're a large publicly traded fleet, long-haul fleet, and I joke with my mom always says, "What do you do exactly?" And I tell her, I get to go to work every day and think about the future of our industry. And what's interesting is I also sort of tell her that if times get tough, I'm going to be the first to go because I don't get involved with day-to-day operations. But I literally have what I think is the third best job in the company is I get to come to events like this. I get to research some of the things that we need to be a little bit more forward-thinking about, what our position needs to be on everything from autonomous and alternative fuels and a lot of the software and the types of things that we see out here. Where do we need to be positioning ourselves as it relates to the next couple of years?
Thanks, I appreciate that. I was curious about how being an innovation strategist works at a company like Covenant, which after all is a 35-year-old asset-based carrier. The founder is the CEO. It's a large company. What kind of resources are being committed to innovation? Are there certain kinds of organizational and cultural challenges, and how have you learned to kind of overcome that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're figuring it out, right? I tell you what we don't have. We don't have a lab. We don't have a lot of projects going on in sort of a testing facility. I actually used to work for a 3PL that did have an innovation lab where that's actually what we did. We tested. I was the drone guy. I would fly drones and test all kinds of different things that vendors were coming out with. But really what we do, or what I do, is our company in 2017 hired a chief transformation officer who's my boss. He's responsible for IT and strategy, innovation, and I was one of his first hires. He gives me a lot of leeway to attend events like this, to visit with vendors that are a little bit more progressive. So for example, I'm on Daimler's EV Council, helping them understand what we need as a fleet as it relates to electric, sort of what those realities look like. We've spent time talking to Nikola. I had a great conversation yesterday for literally an hour and a half with Anthony Lewandowski about autonomous and sort of what that looked like for us. And so literally from any week to week, it can be different, so really, and the last thing I guess I'll say is that it's my role to educate our executives. So it's my role to give our leadership sort of the in-depth education that I'm getting and helping them budget for some of the things that we need to be looking at.
Great, thanks. Mario, you work with a lot of owner-operators and small carriers. And so that, I would imagine that their attitudes toward technology, the way that they adopt technology, and the problems that they're trying to solve look different. And I just wanted you to kind of describe the culture, the attitude toward technology in the community that you work with.
Yes, of course. The owners, operators, and small fleet owners, they usually, it's very hard for them, to adapt to the new, technologies. There's every day some new application coming in. load boards, ELDs. They are around, for a few years. But they're still struggling, to adapt to this, especially ELD. ELD, the hard implementation, that was when, like last year, a year ago. Mm-hmm. Since then, they still fighting, they're still trying to, get rid of this, which is, in my opinion, impossible, and it's not gonna happen. But the thing is, what we do at the eye tracker, we're trying to help them to adapt to this fast-changing digital world, and help them, to stay in business, basically. Because, in my opinion, if people, drivers, small fleet owners, they do not adapt to it, they're going to be out of business in the next few years.
One of the things this is a little bit of a follow-up for you, Mario. One of the things I love about iTrucker is the huge social media community that you guys have built. We talk a lot about how the trucking industry is really fragmented and made up of thousands and thousands of small players, how that slows down the technology adoption, how it creates inefficiencies for in the flow of market information and things like that. But someone like me, a journalist, I cover freight markets. I love Facebook groups like Rate Per Mile Masters and Trucking Rates and Lanes, and seeing these little anecdotes and stories and which brokers are they complaining about and which market is heating up. I just wondered if you could describe a little bit the kinds of Facebook groups that you've built for drivers, what people talk about, and what they learn from each other.
Okay, so yes, we have of course, we have an iTracker page, which is, you can follow. Everybody can follow, add a comment, to the post. But we also have a group which is called Trackers of Past, and Present, and Future. So basically, our group is growing very fast, thanks God. And we have drivers and owners, operators from all over United States, even from all over the world, So basically, they talking about, most of the things. We did the poll a few days ago. What is the one thing you would change, if you can, in the trucking industry? Of course, the hours of service and ELD one, that was the first thing. Second thing, that was the pay, The third thing was cooperation with brokers, right? Because most owners, operators, they working straight with brokers, right? They usually lease to the, trucking companies, but that's the most things, they are concerned about, So
Owner-operators, they're a tricky bunch to please, right? Because you're complaining if they want hours of service to be changed, right? Ostensibly to make them more flexible,
yes,
to open up capacity, make it easier for them to do their jobs. Also want higher pay. The hours of service regulations that we're in, the proposed changes that we're anticipating in July. If they succeed in opening up capacity, that seems like it would, supply and demand would be pretty negative for rates and pay.
Yes, but actually, owners, operators, and single track owners, they think a little bit different. They not very, I don't know how to say. They not follow technology a lot. Technology. They know they have to adapt to it. But they trying to to do it. But basically, they for them it's hard to understand the whole thing, this domino effect,
Yeah, right.
you can call that, so
Randy?
basically, it's hard for them to adapt, they just looking, straight, they're looking at the rates. Right now they understand because, hours of service are so strict. You cannot, pass some, time, they cannot do whatever they want, so they're making less money, If they're gonna, the hours of service gonna be changed, like you said, the rate's gonna drop, well, they're gonna figure out this later on, and it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, I was going to say that nobody in the owner-operator world has Matt investigating new technologies and trying to help them. In Matt's world, they'll tell their 2,000 drivers, because they'll equip their trucks, here's what we're using. In the owner-operator world, they are, in many instances, as Mario said, not technology savvy. They want to drive a truck, run their own business, and so forth. And yet they are faced with more technology choices than any other group of drivers that we have. Because Matt's guys have to use pretty much what Matt decides, or his leadership decides.
His leadership.
There you go. But they get a big chance to vet things, test things, all that sort of thing.
Right.
Bob's trucking, Sue's trucking, Mario's trucking. They're hearing from 9 million different apps and sources and ELD providers and programs.
It's kind of swarming the market.
And they're trying to
right
sort all that out.
Right.
And it's really, really difficult. They also, everything has to happen on a smartphone.
Right.
They don't have Qualcomm units. They don't have those kinds of devices in their cabs. So it really does make a interesting play in a really, really important part of our industry that as business goes up and down, they become the shock absorbers for the industry. All of our brokers rely on them, and every shipper in the country pretty much relies on them. So how do you make that in a way that is manageable for them and provides data that's meaningful for us?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the aspects of kind of what Mario is doing, is using social media to crowdsource knowledge about different technology offerings in the marketplace. And, you know, it's obviously it's anecdotal, but, you know, it's better than nothing in some ways.
Well, that's what we're trying to do at the iTracker. We're trying to get all of this technology in the one place and help these owners, operators, single truck owners, few truck owners, you know, people who's really struggling to adapt to the new technology, to get them in one place and help them to adapt and choose, you know, what they would need, you know, to use, because eventually, in the next few years, like I mentioned before, they're going to have to use it. Without this, they're going to be out of service, out of business, because they own those operators. So, you know, for instance, you know, in a big company like Covenant, you know, like John mentioned, you know, that's what the bosses said, that what the drivers have to do, right? Owner-operator have to choose by himself, and whatever choice he's going to make, that's going to, you know, influence whatever's going to happen in the future for him, you know?
So the title of this panel, Consumer Technology and Transportation, a little amorphous, so if you can bear with us, we're going to try to touch on, you know, a couple of different topics. And just to change tacks a little bit, Randy, you know, we at FreightWaves, we were following some of the proposed legislation regulating autonomous vehicles and how they could be introduced in the industry. We were looking at the AV START Act in the House and the Senate, you know, kind of impressed by the large numbers of autonomous vehicles that were going to be, you know, introduced to the highways in short order. Those bills died in Congress.
Yep.
What happened?
Well, I think that several things happened. Number one, anything that's new in Congress, they're almost terms in contradiction. Our government moves at glacial speed, and technology moves at the speed of light, basically. And so there's a big temporal disconnect there. So in the year and a half that they debated the autonomous vehicles and everything that was going to happen, a lot happened in that space. We had a few accidents. We had some confusion about is autopilot really autonomy, the 5 different levels of autonomy. And people in Washington, there was some opposition from safety groups, some manufacturers, the Teamsters. So when you start taking a long time to work on something that's really complicated, often it dies under its own weight in Washington. Now, as we know, a lot of states have stepped forward and basically made themselves incubators for technology. So I don't think it has slowed down the development of autonomous vehicles. In my mind, it would have been nice to have a framework that allowed testing to take place any place in the country and to use the federal highway system, and there would have been some kind of guidelines around that. That could just as easily have been put in place, though, in a way that ended up hog-tying the development of autonomous vehicles. A minor example of things that are really, really difficult to change are, one of the big things that's slowing down platooning in the United States are following distance laws. Well, they were put in place for a reason, but they are not, they're really in the way of moving on to this new technology.
Right.
I'll add one thing to that. I recently had a conversation with our TDOT commissioner in Tennessee, and he was asking my opinion on a number of the different things that I've been researching, and he said, hey, anybody who wants to bring platooning to the state, here's my card, give them my cell phone number, because, you know, it's funny, different states, you know, outside the federal level have different approaches to it. So if you want a platoon in Tennessee, I got his number for you. Also, I was at the Nikola 2019, the Nikola 2 unveiling in Arizona a few weeks ago, and they were trying to figure out where they needed to open up their headquarters and where they wanted to build their manufacturing facility, and the governor of Arizona said, please come here, do it. So I think it's interesting because you find at the state level, a lot of the senior leadership is a lot more welcoming.
Than the federal level.
More like than the federal level, yeah.
It's always like that, you know, with everything.
Right.
Yeah. Even the MirrorEye people had such a hard time getting a waiver for to get rid of the mirrors on the side of the truck. How simple is that?
The cameras, right? Yeah. Are there any signs of hope with, you know, Secretary Chow, Administrator Martinez? Do they seem more willing to allow for technological experimentation under the regulatory framework?
I think that they do. I mean, they've put out a regulatory framework that allows technology to take place. They've said nice things about it. This administration is kind of a deregulatory administration, but it's only if Congress doesn't actually pass some laws, or we don't have a rulemaking that actually puts some of this framework in place, the next administration could just come in and change it. It's difficult to convince companies that they ought to take a big financial risk, not knowing what that framework's going to be. So I think for now, the autonomous manufacturers that I speak with are satisfied with doing that state testing until they get to the point that they need to be able to do more, and see where the technology is at that point.
It's also important to distinguish, like when we talk about autonomous, I think instantly we think about autonomy 5, level 5, which is full autonomous, cars driving on the road, making every decision that a human could make, probably even faster. But at Covenant, we're taking delivery of a level 2 autonomous truck early, a 2020 Cascadia that we were able to get our hands on early. So that's level 2, which is mostly safety features. In fact, it's all safety features.
So that's
adaptive
like
cruise control, braking, things that really are going to increase the safety of our drivers, of our fleet. But what's interesting is as we try to renegotiate insurance, like, hey, we've got this technology that's going to make things safer. Like, we don't understand it, so you're just going to have to keep
Till the actuarial tables can prove it out, you're not getting a break.
So, you know, and I think that's one thing my job will involve into is to help our, you know, we're self-insured, so we'll help educate our insurance providers what some of that means.
That's really interesting. There's been a lot in the media about 5G technology, 5G connectivity, the sort of, you know, less than a millisecond latency it provides, and the technological revolution that this spectrum will supposedly unlock. We were having a conversation a little bit earlier that suggested that some of that might be a little overhyped. I just wondered, maybe Randy first, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, what people are saying, what the technology actually does, the you know, sort of quantifiable improvements you can make off of it, and the barriers to it being implemented.
Yeah. So the upside of 5G, which we talked about it, is that, you know, it's going to have downloads about 100 times faster than a 4G network. And it can have, the pipeline that can move data is about 1,000 times bigger. I mean, it'll change a lot of things that require big data flows, video, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. That stuff's going to be really, really meaningful for
Driver streaming Netflix. Driver streaming Netflix.
While
yeah,
driving.
so there you go. So some of those things will be important, and they may, in our industry, a decade or two out, that may translate to somebody that can drive a truck with a joystick sitting in a room someplace. It's really not an autonomous truck, and it's not a driverless truck, but it happens because there's all this pipeline available to connect. The downside of this stuff is most of the applications that we use now in our industry, whether they're safety tech, whether they're the data packets that move from our smartphones or our vehicles back to headquarters and communication stuff, there will be, except for dead areas, which this should improve dead areas and latency, there's not going to be a big difference. The difference between 1/100th of a millisecond and a millisecond in the human mind doesn't make any difference. In digital space, it's huge. So that'll make a difference. And it's going to take years to roll that all out. It requires a different cell antenna system because it runs on a different frequency. Now, because it runs on a different frequency, your existing equipment, your hardware, your cell phones, will not be able to use 5G. So while we've got half of a network going, we're going to have equipment that'll do 5G and 4G, and so it's going to require a lot of equipment upgrades to be able to use that, and in many instances, we're going to be upgrading the equipment with no real benefit for our industry. Now, this is going to allow a lot of stuff to happen that we haven't even contemplated yet, and it does involve some of these more exotic things, and as we work with bigger and bigger data, as we work with more and more machine learning, more and more video, and the potential to have real-time transmissions of surrounding areas of autonomous vehicles being transmitted someplace, that stuff all becomes important and meaningful, but it's not going to be this instantaneous change that somehow you see a big difference.
Yeah,
I'll add one thing to that.
I was going to ask you that, just one little follow. The telecoms would have us believe that with 5G, autonomous vehicles will somehow be running off the cloud, but I was going to ask you.
It's still a long way.
Yeah, I don't believe that happens.
5G and autonomous vehicles, they very connected,
Yeah.
and it's still a long way to go.
Yeah, I was going to add, so again, I told you I talked to Anthony Lewandowski for a while, and for those of you that might not have realized what a big deal it was for him to be here, he's sort of the father of a lot of this stuff. I started following him when he was in college doing the Ghost Rider, the DARPA. He and his team won the DARPA challenge. But I asked him specifically, I said, do you see a day when some part of autonomous driving will be in the cloud? And he said, absolutely not. It will always be on the cab. You just can't ever take a chance on latency issues. And it's funny when he described what his device looks like. It's really just a computer, a brake actuator, and a steering wheel device. It's that simple.
Right. Well, and every technology provider, and for those of you that don't know, the government set aside the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum for connected vehicles, for V2V, V2I, all safety tech and safety tech transmissions that will communicate between vehicles are designed to do that. So the telecoms are coming out and saying, well, 5G will take care of all that. That's all part of a debate where they're trying to get the government to free up 5.9 to give them more bandwidth in some other areas so they can sell more stuff. So it's not an altruistic reason that they want 5.9 to go away. Every manufacturer I know and every safety provider I know and the big brains like Anthony are insistent that it's going to be this shortwave DRC on the 5.9 gigahertz.
Interesting. I'm curious just to hear a little bit more about the sorts of issues that you tackle in Washington, Randy. I know we spoke a little bit earlier about some alternative fuels for trucks. Obviously, we were talking to Elizabeth yesterday from Nikola. I'm just, again, curious to hear what are the debates around those fuels and who are the stakeholders?
So the debates around alternative fuels run everywhere from we should be totally off of petroleum, the Green New Deal, to no, we should drill, baby, drill. And both those sides are alive and well. Where I'm spending a lot of time right now is educational processes around these things, and I'm an advocate of kind of all of the above until one really proves itself dominant and can take over these things. With the T&I committee in the House of Representatives, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, they're the ones that typically do the infrastructure bills. This is where the pay for mechanisms all come out of the House of Representatives, and that's controlled by the Democrats right now. This is not a political statement. That's not a good or a bad thing. It's just they're controlled by the Democrats right now, and they've been very clear that they're not going to pass a transportation and infrastructure bill that does not have a huge environmental component in that. That will reach out and touch us, our industry, in fuels, other kinds of emissions. How do you pay for this? Does it become a carbon tax? So there's a lot of implications in those sorts of debates for us and for our industry and for the way rates are structured. Collecting things through a fuel tax, everybody pretty much knows how that works. Change that to a vehicle mile travel tax, everybody can figure that out. We all do IFTA, but we know where we run. Take VMT and turn that into a gantry system that makes every municipality and every county and every state into its own individual tolling entity, and everybody does time of day tolling or congestion pricing. All of a sudden, our industry cannot quote a rate. It really, really becomes problematic. So those kind of debates are really important for us right now.
I think we have a few more minutes for some questions. Obviously, another big part of consumer technology and transportation, I think we'd be remiss not to mention, is the electrification of vehicles. We see it obviously on the passenger, the personal vehicle side first. A number of companies are working on electric semis, and I just, when we're talking, you mentioned earlier the Green New Deal is focusing on sustainable infrastructure. When we're talking about commercial vehicles charging, hundreds of kilowatt-hour batteries, supposedly rapidly, what are the challenges to really creating like a nationwide network of charging stations for commercial vehicles?
Well, I mean, they're huge,
Well,
as you know.
so I'll tackle that because next week we're actually, one of our team members is going to head out to Daimler, which provides 85% of our fleet, to their EV council, and we're going to talk about not the technology of the truck, but how to deal with the charging stations. And so for us, as a long-haul fleet, we don't do hub and spoke, we don't come back home every night, so we have to rely on charging stations on the road, in truck stops and other places, and they just don't exist, which makes us not a very good candidate for that sort of thing. I was speaking at ACT Expo a few weeks ago, the alternative fuel conference out in California. I was talking to a guy from Travel Centers of America, and we just sort of hypothesized about 50 charging stations at a truck stop, which is 7 to 10 acres in size. It would cause a lot of congestion, but let's just say that they were there. He would brown out the entire city if they were all charging at the same time. And so, it's interesting. I think that's almost a bigger challenge than the actual technology in the trucks themselves.
Yeah. But I want to add something about this. That's what the Nikola is doing, to fuel the, Nikola truck with the hydrogen. It's going to take, what, 15 minutes?
No,
But it takes energy to make hydrogen. It takes a lot of energy to make hydrogen.
Yes,
and
but
so,
that's, at least in my opinion, that's the winner. That's going to be the winner, the hydrogen.
well, and that's one of those ones where I say kind of all of the above, because we'll know. I think that 60% of our fleet now runs short haul, particularly when you think of delivery trucks around town and dray trucks and hub and spoke networks. 60% of our fleet now runs short enough distances they could go electric. But we don't have the capacity to do that, and it's hugely expensive. I can remember, let's just say you buy 1,000 trucks a year, and that's your CapEx thing for a major fleet, and you decide you're going electric, so now you can only buy 700 trucks at the same amount. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
The average truck in the United States, I think, is 11.2 years old. These are Class 8s. That's a long time to turn the fleet over. So none of this stuff's happening tomorrow.
I'll add one other thing to that. I was at a closed-door fleet meeting a couple of weeks ago when I was at ACT Expo, and one of the the people in the room, they're probably here, so I can't say who it was, but they said that they would sometimes put a green quote and a diesel quote in front of a customer.
They always take the diesel.
And they always take the diesel quote. And so what's interesting about that is when we go on sales calls, including one this week, our customers are starting to ask us a little bit more like, what's your green roadmap? Or what is your non-diesel roadmap? Now, I think it's more of a question as to what are you going to be doing in the future? And they just kind of want to have an idea of what our future looks like. But so far, people always take the diesel option because it's the less expensive option.
Still, but
Yep.
still it's less expensive, but in the near future, it's going to start changing a little by little.
And one other thing too, it's a younger crowd. A guy from Anheuser-Busch does all the buying for their transportation. And what he shared with me, he's like, look, I'm 32 years old. It's important to me, and I will push this
Till
internally.
beer's $10 more a
Well,
case.
I said, you know
that's
what,
important to
I would
me.
love to see you be successful at that, but the younger buyers are pushing for those types
Plus he
of.
drinks wine.
Thanks a lot, guys. We are out of time. Please give our guests a hand.
Thanks, Jake.
Great job.